a very articulate guy. This is a painting by John Woodhouse Audubon, a relative of James Audubon. But anyway, great guy. And just in case you want to see the Canadian River, there it is. Isn't it cute? And as they come west, south of Oklahoma City, they cross a creek, Choteau Creek. The Choteaus, of course, are some of the, like the Roubidoux, are French-Canadian trappers. And he had a trading post which had already been abandoned by the time the immigrants came through. When they did the survey, the land survey of Oklahoma, the trail was still visible, and you can see it here trailing through these areas. So you can follow the trail very precisely with these maps if you're interested. All on private land now for the most part, so that's an issue. We get out west a little farther. We have, this is just west of Oklahoma City. I want to talk about this rock here, but there are lots of mounds as you're still just barely on the south side of the Canadian. And this has to do with a lovely young woman and a rock Mary. And it's on private land now, but it's just a little bit west of Oklahoma City, a few miles. And they named it for a young woman who was the daughter of a physician named Conway who had 10 children, and he decided to go to California. There's a Conway, Arkansas. His brother was governor of Arkansas, and they had 3 or 4 wagons. And his oldest daughter was Mary Conway, 17 years old. She was the belle of the immigration. They all just loved her. All these men, of course, you know. And I think we ought to be writing some articles now on romance on the overland trails. And I think that's something, you know, I want to see one of those in Desert Tracks or the Overland Journal or something pretty soon. We've got to have a little romance, don't we? More interesting reading. Now, why would they have named this rock after Mary? I'll let you figure that out. Here I am up here checking it out more carefully. And you know, that's a little obscene maybe, but anyway, there are some names. I was actually looking for names. Immigrants carved some of their names up here on this one, on the right chest here. But anyway. Oh, 1 or 2. I'm not going to go into them now. I don't have time, but 1 or 2. Yeah, that's the one. Anyway, here's the Oklahoma Historical Society put up a marker there in 1960, about a little over half a century ago, I guess. So anyway, that's it. And here's a beautiful Mary Conway. So a couple of the lieutenants fell in love with her as she marched. She rode this really fancy stallion, black stallion, alongside everybody, prancing along, you know, the beautiful woman of the immigration. And two lieutenants, John Buford and Lieutenant Montgomery Pike Harrison, were fighting each other for her hand. And after they got roughly to Santa Fe, or almost, to Santa Fe, she agreed she would marry Harrison. And Harrison wanted to do it that very day. I want to get married quick. And her father said, no, you're going to have to wait till we get to California. You can get a leave of absence, then you can come over and marry her. Well, he never made it back. I'll explain why in a minute. And Buford had to join an expedition to go out against the Navajos as soon as they got to Santa Fe, so he never saw her again either. Harrison agreed to go down the river on another expedition, hoping she would pass him again, but that never happened either. So anyway, you probably can't read that in here. It's too dark, but this is what happened to Harrison, basically. When Marcy was coming back, he decided to come back across Texas. I'll mention that in a minute. And over there by Odessa, seems like there was some kind of event in Odessa recently. Is that right? Midland, Odessa. Well, anyway, just beyond that, he was involved in a little event. They were camping on the way back, and he went off to investigate a little ravine on the headwaters of what is the Colorado River of Texas. And a couple of Kiowas came up. We don't know what exactly happened because he never came back. But anyway, they got his gun and they shot him in the back of the head. And the next day, Marcy's people found him what do you do with a dead lieutenant? They took a wagon. They made what's the word I want? A box. And they put him in it, and they filled the box with charcoal so that he wouldn't rot too bad. And they hauled him all the way back to Fort Smith, and they buried him at Fort Smith. And then his family finally dug him up and took him back east again. He was the relative of Benjamin Harrison, and what's that other Harrison president's name? William Henry. Thank you. Good. So there are two Harrisons, and he was the older brother of the first one and a grandson of the second one. And of course that was his story, but not a very happy ending. But it's a nice romance story. The poor guy didn't get it. She moved on to California. On the way to California, she stopped, of course, at Yuma, and there was this guy in Yuma waiting for her. The word was out. Cave Johnson Couts. Anybody heard of him? You're going to learn a lot about him when you go to Yuma, if you haven't already, because he was stationed at Yuma to help the immigrants get across the river, protect them, and, of course, to do sweet things, if he could, with Mary Conway. And he eventually went to California, and he made some great maps of the trail, and also a diary. But anyway, he talks in his diary about how he had saved a lump of sugar for Mary. Oh, when she gets here, I'm going to give her my lump of sugar, that'd be sweet. And so he did, and she continued on anyway. But he followed along with him for several miles down into what is now Mexico. Anyway, so that's the love story. And then she married a sea captain when they got to California. So none of these lieutenants. These are some more scenes along the trail that they're doing along the Arkansas. These are simply some pillars. And here's my photograph of them following the trail. So you know where they. If you use these illustrations, one of the advantages, you can see exactly where the trail was. And that's what I like. I like painters. Here are the Antelope Hills. They're on the boundary between Texas and Oklahoma. And here's a painting of the boundary hills, done by Mulhausen, actually. The wagon train's going down Antelope Hills. Here's the Canadian River again out in Texas. This is the Texas. The Texans are pretty good about putting up markers. Again, we're not going to try to read it, but it just talks about the expedition across Texas. And it's very, very accurate and very well done. Here are some rocks that are just barely inside of Texas that were drawn in 1853. And these are called the Richardson Bluffs now. Here they are today or last week or sometime. And there was here's Lieutenant Abert's view of riding wagons along the Canadian River. Doesn't look like a very good wagon trail to me, but that's how it is sometimes. Here's a view of a cottonwood tree. It looks to me like several trees together. It was 12 feet in diameter, big cottonwood. And one of the differences back then, before we started doing all of this irrigation from wells in this area that have lowered the water table about 100 feet, this area was very rich in vegetation. There were all kinds of grapevines growing. They all ate grapes all the way across the Texas Panhandle. Now it's barren. But anyway, that's just a change because of irrigation and lowering the water table. And of course, there were Plains Indians. There's a painting of a Kiowa camp. They didn't encounter this camp right here, but it was a year or two later. But that's how the camps were, Kiowa camp. Here's some Comanches, and it's mainly the Kiowas and Comanches here. And of course, down in this country, it was the Apaches who caused some immigrants a little bit of concern. And a little farther down the road, there's a little place now called Rocky Dell. It's on a private ranch. It was a water hole, and there are some really interesting drawings on the wall done by somebody, possibly probably, I'm not sure, probably Kiowas, but anyway. Or if you watch the channel on Ancient Aliens, it's probably the aliens. Looks more like Ancient Aliens to me, especially that guy on the right there. What's wrong one? Let me try that. There we are. Here's the sheriff of Oldham County, David Medlin, who is showing me the great water monster here, the head of the water monster, that probably is an alligator that the Kiowas saw when they were way, way down there in Mexico somewhere. Here's a close-up just of the head. It has some, sometimes they have horns on them like you'd see on an elk horns. Here's a sketch by a Kiowa artist of one of them, which has elk horns and, of course, a tail and teeth. So we're not sure exactly what it is. I haven't run into one of these fishing yet, but anyway. And here's the continuation of the road going from across New Mexico and finally up to Santa Fe. This is another Tom Jonas map. Tom couldn't be here because he's doing the presentation at the same time back at the ranch up there. So here's the Tucumcari. Theoretically, story that Tucum and Carrie were lovers, and they couldn't marry, and so they jumped off of here. So I know that's probably not true, but it's a good story. Makes for a romantic story. We want romanticism on the trail, especially people who jump off because they can't get what they want, I guess. Here's a view of it. Here's a view of New Mexico, by the way. I just wanted to show you this map of New Mexico. Oh, there it is. Okay. This little skinny thing is New Mexico right here, based on the map that was used for ending the Mexican War. So, and as you can see, it's a very useful map. But at least it gives you an idea that this was by John Disternell. And it was a map that the guy negotiating the treaty for the United States had in Mexico, or not in Mexico City, but near Mexico City when they, in Guadalupe Hidalgo actually, when they negotiated the treaty in which we got half of Mexico. Not a bad deal. Invade Mexico, take half of it under manifest destiny. It's our destiny to have it. We damn well better have it. So anyway, we got it. But anyway, you get that idea of the shape of the area, and of course there's always a big fight between Texas and the United States about whether it's part of Texas. And the Texans tried to take it on, of course, in 1841, the Texas Santa Fe expedition. They failed, and so it's not part of Texas anymore. So sorry, you're not in Texas. This is an interesting little area to me because of this is Laguna Colorada. This is a little lake that's on the trail before you get over here. And what I found interesting on the flats is you can see the lake. The guy doing this one put part of the lake in, and the guy over here didn't bother. So it's kind of interesting. You got to be careful. And this is the trail, the immigrant trail drawn in here with the whatever. Whoops, yeah, that's good. There's a sketch, the lake's under there. Here's the wagons, if you can see them down at the bottom, right in here, and this rock. And so I figured if I could find that rock, I'd know where they went. So I did. There it is. And there are no wagons down there anymore, but at least you get the idea. So that was handy. And here's the staked plains, as they were called. They went along in the lowlands and the staked plains, Llano Estacado. And this is a nice little town that I've always enjoyed visiting, Anton Chico on the Pecos River. It doesn't look like it's a lot different than it probably looked back in the 1840s, is my guess. But anyway, a nice place to visit. Still a lot of buildings made out of adobe. And here's the Pecos River. course, the Pecos is crossed in various places all the way down through Texas and up toward its headwaters. So, I mean, it's a very significant river for emigration. Here's the Church of San Miguel del Vado on the river at a crossing. That's what Vado is a ford. And here's the church today. And here's the ruins of the Church of Pecos, the Pecos Pueblo. And here's sort of what it looks like today, so it's still visible. And I don't know if any of you made it up to the plaza. I couldn't figure out where it was. We're a long way away. But anyway, this is a picture I took of the plaza back about 50 years ago. There's only one old car there. So anyway, the plaza. That's the museum's right in there, I think. And what was interesting for immigrants was, of course, the fandangos. Got to have a lot of dancing. So anyway, that's James Abert did that sketch in the late 1840s. And one more. I went gambling last night, and this is a picture that I took down at the gambling hall. And she wasn't doing too well, that woman. But anyway, I only lost $700, so I feel pretty good about it. But anyway, gambling was a big deal in Santa Fe, so people talked about it. And when I was trying to park this morning up here where there's no parking, obviously, and I had my rental car in front of me here, but anyway, I finally found a parking place on the sidewalk, so that's where I parked. Now, Marcy coming back, he went to Santa Fe, and he got the immigrants to Santa Fe. And where did the immigrants go after Santa Fe? What direction? They went north? South? West? East? Most of them, when Beale developed the Route 66 road through Albuquerque, a few of them went that way, but that wasn't developed until pretty late, till the 1857-58 period, Interstate 40 or whatever it's called now. But they went down the Rio Grande, didn't they? The Rio Bravo. And they went down and they got to another river down there by a little bit north of El Paso, right? The Gila. You heard the Gila monsters, right? Seen a few of those down there. So they went down. They got to Santa Fe. They go south all the way down to say Las Cruces area, if you're familiar with Las Cruces, Dona Ana, and then they went west until they hit the Gila, and they followed the Gila all the way to where you're going to be meeting in February, Yuma, where it dumps into the, on all the old maps, it of course goes into the Gulf of California, but anyway, in reality it runs into the Colorado, and then they went across the desert, Imperial Desert and whatever, finally to California. So it occurred to Marcy, maybe I could make a shorter route if they're going to go way down there anyway, just to cut across Texas. And so that's what he did. And you saw this map a while ago. So instead of, here's Santa Fe, instead of this thing and then going way down here and then off along that way, why not come back this way, back to Fort Smith? And we know from our plane geometry it'd be a shorter trip. And it was. And so that's what he did. And that's why Harrison got killed, if you want to figure out the consequences. But anyway, I'm not going to show you a bunch of maps because we're about out of time, but out of time, excuse me. We are in town, but out of time. If you go down to Dona Ana here, you can cross the Oregon Mountains are here, but you can cross through here, through this pass, and you can drop down. You can see Captain Marcy's route here. You can drop down to Waco Tanks, which is actually as far south as El Paso. Here's a couple of pictures of Waco Tanks. There's a lot of water there where the trees are, and I climbed up to this hole here where the Indians head out to, or whoever, robbers, to catch people who were asleep maybe at the wheel. But anyway, Waco Tanks, and then they went out across Texas. And anyway, I'm not going to go into the detail because we're out of time, but this is in Surrey County where Harrison was killed. They were camping here by Ira, and he went over here to this little creek right here, and it was somewhere in here where the Indians killed him. So anyway, that's the end of his story. But one more thing. Somebody was asking a question about the Butterfield Overland Trail, and this is not to talk about Butterfield, but I want to suggest that Marcy, in a very general way, laid out the route of the Marcy laid out the route of the Butterfield, or as it's called here, the accurate name, the Overland Mail, from Fort Smith, from Arkansas, on across Texas. And so that's one of his great accomplishments, I think, although he doesn't get any credit for it. And the stagecoaches I remember, the one John Wayne was always in is the one on the right. But they dumped those and took this other little wagon across Texas. So it's not John Wayne's stagecoach. You have to wait till you get over to somewhere else for that. But anyway, that's all I have to say today about this. But anyway, Marcy's very important, not as a military guy, but as a trail guy and as an author and an immigrant helper. He was very good at it. Question, yes.
David, I apologize if I missed it. You can skip it.
Well, apologies are accepted.
If I did miss it, his expedition outbound to Santa Fe, that's obviously 49.
49, yeah.
Is he doing simply topography reporting, or is this a military?
It's a military expedition. They do a little bit of road work, and but Beale comes back in the late 1850s and built bridges across a lot of these creeks where they couldn't get hardly across.
So they're going out for military purposes.
Right. They're determining where the road is, and they're also providing an escort for several hundred immigrants, including Mary Conway.
So did they get involved in any quote-unquote action?
No.
So their main job?
No, there are enough of them. They're not going to be attacked.
So their main job is to provide military.
Yes, I would say that's correct. Well, is it time for, yes, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, good question. Fort Marcy, have anybody been to Fort Marcy here in Santa Fe? It's up on the hill. I stayed in a condo up there once, really nice accommodation. No. It's named for William Marcy, who was at the time Secretary of War when Stephen Watch Kearny named it in 1846 when he built the fort up there. So that's the answer. It's Fort Marcy is not after this Marcy. But
so the street for Marcy Street in Santa Fe is not named after Captain Randolph Marcy.
No, it's named after William Marcy. Did I submit any of this to the Park Service for the Butterfield Trail? And the answer is no. That's just a general thing. He went out and did more exploration along the area in the 1850s when he was stationed in Oklahoma. But he didn't lay it out in a real specific way, but he did draw maps, and that became pretty obvious, I think. Not in a direct way, but when they were trying to lay out the Butterfield route, then it's pretty obvious, and some trails had been pretty well developed by then, by the late 1850s. Yeah,
1859, the Prairie Traveler.
Yes.
What does it cover?
It covered traveling. It covered immigration, all kinds of immigration issues across the trails, mostly the southern trails, with maps. Yeah, with maps and recommended campsites and then that whole business. Yeah. Yes, whole Southwest.
David, you touched on the itineraries, and the itineraries are where the real information is
Yes.
on each one of these.
Yes.
You have to be careful when you buy the book that you get one that's got all the itineraries, because later publications cut out some.
Yeah, they cut out a bunch of it. And it was, you ought to get one because you paid for it. It was a government publication originally. Your tax dollars at work. So yes, it's a very important guide. But as I said, the timing is not real great. uh, uh, 59, I believe. So, I mean, it's getting a little late. And by the time the Civil War's open, you got the railroad, of course.
It's a compilation of numerous expeditions, is that correct?
No, just, well, the route said that numerous expeditions took, yes. That is a compilation, yes.
David, can I comment on the 1850 return from Fort Massachusetts? Well, one of the things that happens is they've accumulated all these animals to return to Fort Bridger with, and as they approach the watershed divide between the Arkansas and the South Platte, there's a 60-hour snowstorm, and the animals spread for miles. It takes them, and they nearly lose Loring, who's the captain over Marcy, and as his tent falls in and his servant can barely keep the snow off of him. So a 60-hour snowstorm, and Marcy and Loring are trying to take these things back. They build a raft to get across the South Platte River when they get there, and they make that traverse, and they put the raft on wagons and carry it all the way through Wyoming to the North Platte, where they finally decide it's not going to be so useful anymore.
No, not too useful. Loring, who is the escort, is an interesting guy. He joined the Confederacy when the war broke out, and after the Civil War was over, he got a job working in Saudi Arabia, I believe, for the you know, that's where he spent the rest of his Army career, at least over there. But interesting person. Loring's diary's in the Bancroft Library, if you're interested in looking at it. Somewhere in California, wherever that might be. Berkeley, maybe. Anything else? Well, it's time for our new program now. Thank you.